So, good afternoon. First of all, thank you to the JSS for inviting me. To our Greek friends, Kalo apoyevma, I think that's the expression. It's not easy to keep an audience in the afternoon session, so I'll do it by scaring your pants off of you. At least I'll try. That's why I call it Mare Nostrum Shinensis. Okay. The mere fact that we're discussing China in a conference on the Eastern Mediterranean amply demonstrates that China is a global actor. Some people are perhaps not aware of it, but nevertheless it's true. You can see, if I can, okay. This is a deployment of Chinese-owned or invested ports across the world, from East Asia onto what our Indian friends call the string of pearls, trying to perhaps encircle India, and to the Persian Gulf, Suez Canal, and the Middle East. We see a strong concentration of Chinese investment in ports in Northern Europe and, of course, in the Mediterranean. China is active in three main vectors in the Mediterranean. One is infrastructure, investment in infrastructure, ports, but not just ports. They're also investing in submarine cables, also in railway, also in energy. They're active in a diplomatic vector, creating new forums of China and South Europe, China, other actors' cooperation, and in a military aspect. Now, I'll talk mostly about the ports because this is the most important thing for China. This is where they put their money and where their mouth is, but also briefly address other aspects. Now, China does not have a Mediterranean policy. It also does not have, certainly, Eastern Mediterranean policy. But China has an overall global strategy, of which the Mediterranean is a component. So you cannot really understand what China is trying to do across the globe without talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, first proposed by President Xi Jinping in 2013 in a speech in Astana, Kazakhstan. And the Belt and Road, why it's called the Belt and Road, because it's the belt, the economic road and the land road. The land road follows the ancient Silk Route. This is why sometimes the Belt and Road Initiative is called the New Silk Road. And the maritime road goes following the main shipping lanes of the world, as we've seen previously. The idea of the Belt and Road is to basically create a new global economic order, and emphasize economic, not necessarily political. The impetus for this policy is to open new markets for China and to get their goods onto the global markets. This comes, of course, after the global financial crisis. But no doubt it has also political components. What is the Belt and Road? It involves about a third of global GDP, 35% of world trade, about 80 countries and international institutions participating in the Belt and Road, including Israel, including Greece. The idea is actually is not a bad idea to bring infrastructure to areas where they don't have infrastructure or the funds to buy it. Of course, rarely a gift comes without strings attached. According to the International Monetary Fund in 2014, China overtook the US as the largest economic entity based on purchasing power parity. And this is the first time it happened in 142 years. The last time was in 1872 when the US took over Britain. Perhaps this is why the US keeps seeing red everywhere. And you can see Chinese economic power on display everywhere and in the Mediterranean as well. Of course, this is the overseas direct investment coming out of China into the world. In 2015, for the first time in human history, China's ODI exceeded FDI, means China invested more in the world than the world invested in China. You see, 2017 compared with 2016, there was a drop for two reasons. First of all, President Trump, but mainly because China itself tried to stem some of the outlooks for internal political reasons. I don't have time to get into it, but it's alive and kicking. The Chinese are still investing. Here you can see a comparison of regions. You can see in 2017, Europe, for the first time, Chinese ODI in Europe exceeds Chinese ODI in the US, again, for political reasons. And this is a good graphic explaining, sort of demonstrating what exactly is the Belt and Road. So in orange, in orange, you can see this is the what is called the Silk Road economic belt going through Central Asia. This more or less along the ancient Silk Road and on to Europe. And in blue, it's not very obvious, but you can see like here, basically following the major trading routes in the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, and the Suez and the Mediterranean. And you can see Chinese are invested in ports in all of these places, including choke points of trade. So the Malacca Strait, this is why the Chinese are talking to the Thailand, trying to dig a tunnel here called the Kra Tunnel to basically shorten this transfer instead of going around through Straits of Malacca, which is very easy to block. A channel. Yeah, a channel. A Kra is called Kra, is the name of a place in Thailand. A couple of 20, 30 kilometers, just basically like a Panama canal. What's interesting, and this was, what's interesting is that the Suez Canal is important for China also because it's complementary to trans-Pacific trade. Apparently, the Panama Canal cannot handle the biggest shipping vessels of the 18,000 TEU ships. They just cannot pass there, and they can through the Suez Canal. So some of the Chinese trade, and China is the largest manufacturing nation, largest trading nation, some of it goes instead through the Pacific, goes through the Atlantic. Maybe it's a little longer, but still probably cost effective. And you can see Djibouti. Previous speakers talked about this. This is the first military base of China. Again, first time in human history. In Djibouti, about 6 kilometers from Camp Lemonnier, the US base there. So I hope they're good friends. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. The Chinese have been investing. So, with the appetite comes with the food. The Chinese have a lot of money to invest, and they're investing in ports all over the world, not just in the Mediterranean, but also in the Mediterranean. So in the past decade, China invested in 13 ports in Europe. Europe, that's North Europe, Southern Europe, Mediterranean. And China now controls about 10% of container traffic in Europe. Military exchanges. I love this quote. I'm going to read it. The Piraeus port is a pearl of the Mediterranean, the pride of Greece, the lodestar of China-Greece cooperation, and a place where our joint dreams come true. This is the charge d'affaires of the Chinese embassy in Athens when the Chinese fleet visited Piraeus. By the way, China and Greece already had maneuvers in 2015. China also had, in the Mediterranean, China also had maneuvers with Russia in 2015 in the Mediterranean, and they also visited Israel. Now, China has the fastest growing navy in the world. Again, they have the funds, so they're spending it. With China, it's interesting. Maybe I'll show it in the next slide, just a second. You see defense spending of China? Far behind the US, but large and growing. And with China, you have to remember that first of all, we don't know how much I have to admit, we don't know how much they're really spending on defense. It's an estimate. But what's interesting, the Chinese are spending more on internal security, public security, military, et cetera, in China than on their defense. That just shows you the priorities of the party. But on a GDP basis, as a part of the GDP, Chinese spending on defense is actually not that large. Okay. Dual use. China doesn't really have military strategy, civilian strategy, maritime strategy. It's all one package. So when China invests in a commercial port, it is understood, and they're obligated under Chinese law, to help their navy, their military vessels to do what they need to do, maintenance, refueling, etc. So you can see, China has first military base in Djibouti, talk about Gwadar in Pakistan, even in the Seychelles, and of course Darwin. Now, specifically for the Mediterranean, China is all over the Mediterranean, not just Piraeus, even in Algeria, also in Turkey. They bought 65% of Kumport terminal in the Amberley port in near Istanbul. Also in Italy, in Genoa, Ashdod and Haifa, and of course all over Northern Europe. This is, I'm sorry, this is terrible, but this is a very detailed list and I couldn't find anything bigger. But basically this shows you the state-owned shipping companies and their investments in ports. So they're present from Rotterdam and Zeebrugge in Belgium and on to Mediterranean, Southern Mediterranean and elsewhere with various stakes. I hope I wrote this correctly. Elada. Okay, okay. Bravo. Okay. Thanks, Google. COSCO, which is the sort of main state-owned enterprises when it comes to marine issues, they took over, they got a concession for 35 years for Pier 1 and Pier 2 in Piraeus. And they also, this agreement was signed already in 2008. In 2016, they took 51% stake in the Piraeus Port Authority. So they're not just running the terminals, but they're also managing what's going on there. If you believe the media, and I don't read Greek, so I cannot verify, but according to the Chinese, they managed to turn around Piraeus. The capacity grew. Piraeus became, I think, the 7th largest port in Europe, thanks to much needed Chinese investment. And labor. Labor practices, yes. I didn't want to say this. So this is not very clear. But China is also present in ports in Israel, also railways. A Chinese company is building a new port it's called the Southern Port in Ashdod, PMIC, and it will be operated by a Dutch company, TIL. In Haifa, the situation is the opposite. A new port in Haifa is being built by Israeli companies, but it will be managed by concession by SIPG, Shanghai International Port Group, for 25 years. Both ports are expected to be in operation 2021, in a couple of years. And the Chinese are even in the Suez Canal. The Chinese are present in ports in Alexandria and Port Said, but also they're building a new terminal in, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, in Sokhna, south of the Suez Canal. Sokhna. Now, I will leave you with a couple of questions going forward. I cannot say I can answer all of these questions, but we need to think about this. So will flags follow trade? And I think the conclusion is probably yes. It's probably inevitable. We've seen maneuvers of Chinese Navy in the Mediterranean with Greece, with Russia. China is, I have to say, doing very smart diplomatic work. It's creating regional forums of cooperation. So, for example, if you didn't know, there's a China Southern Europe Maritime Cooperation Forum from 2015 with 6 countries, what is called PIGS: Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, Cyprus, and Malta, from 2015. China is active in Central and Eastern Europe through a forum called the 16+1. That's 11 EU members and 5 Balkan states, so 16+1 annual meeting with the Chinese premier. And just to give an example of geopolitical influence, in 2016, when the Philippines took their case about the South China Sea, their quibble with China, and the International Arbitration Court said that China is wrong in the South China Sea, China ignored this decision, and the EU wanted to pass a statement criticizing China. This was blocked by Greece, Hungary, and Croatia. The Chinese investment in Europe follows the following lines, and again, including Mediterranean and Southern Europe. First of all, the Chinese investment goes where there's a need for investment, so sluggish economic growth in Southern Europe. Secondly, they're investing in ports when there's a need, where there's infrastructure deficit, so old infrastructure where they need to expand terminals. Thirdly, the Chinese are capitalizing on a very interesting point, is that most of these Southern European countries with which China is cooperating are Eurosceptics. So they're very happy to use China as a sort of an alternative to the EU to stick a thumb in Brussels' eye. I think I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Nick Laragakis of the American Hellenic Institute speak about